All right, if you're anything like me, you hate running out of food on a trip. It's like a big fear, and so I'm a big fan of snacks during an adventure, and one of my absolute favorite go-to snacks are wonderful pistachios. You may be familiar with pistachios and the brand Wonderful Pistachios, but if you're not, they are one of the highest protein nuts out there. 1 ounce serving of Wonderful Pistachios is 6 grams of protein. That's 10% of your daily value. It also includes 9 essential amino acids, and they come with a ton of different flavors, varieties. There's a spicy version, there's lightly salted, there's no salted, there's so many, and every time I go on an adventure, I'm not even lying, I take an entire bag with me. And what's cool too, I love having the Wonderful Pistachio in shell, because then that almost gives me something to do and focus on as I'm paddling or biking through the really monotonous parts of the adventure. Every great adventure is going to have plenty of boring moments, and it's nice to have something to do and also something that is giving you some fuel, like Wonderful Pistachios. So they're one of my favorite adventure snacks, favorite road trip snacks, and definitely leave me feeling better than a lot of other snacks you can turn to. So if you want to learn more about how to fuel your next adventure with Wonderful Pistachios, go to wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Today's Adventure Sports podcast is sponsored by Badlands Ranch Superfood Complete. Why are so many dogs suffering with health issues? Well, Katherine Heigl, who's helped save over 16,000 dogs through her foundation, says she is seeing more issues with dogs' joints, odors, and health than ever before. And after doing tons of research, she feels the one place that we can do the most good for any dog's health is their food. So she decided to create something that she could feel good about her dogs eating, and it's called Superfood Complete. It's made with over 30 of the healthiest ingredients on the planet, including several superfoods vital for dogs' health. I have an aging dog who has had some joint issues, and he is absolutely loving the Badlands Ranch Superfood Complete. And I feel a lot better knowing I'm doing a little bit more to help him with his aging joints and some of those issues that are now popping up. If you want to try it, go to badlandsranch.com/ASP and order right now to get 50% off your regular price order with a 90-day money-back guarantee. If you want your dog to experience all the incredible things, go to badlandsranch.com/ASP. Again, badlandsranch.com/ASP. So, one of the stereotypes when you get older, you start really getting into birds, and it is very true for me. My wife and I are like, is that a cardinal? Is that a mockingbird? A blue jay, whatever it is, I'm really getting into birds. And what I'm very excited about is the new Feather Snap, which is a Wi-Fi enabled smart bird feeder that blends the best of technology and nature. It's this unique dual bird feeder that helps attract more species with built-in solar panels and keeps your camera battery going strong to charge the camera that's on there, and then it sends it to your phone and also identifies the birds that are going to your feeder. Me and the kids are absolutely loving it, and we've been really surprised by what's come to our bird feeder. Just for transparency, I got my mom a trail camera last year so she could see all the animals in her backyard, and the first night we saw a bear. A bear. We didn't even know there were bears. I mean, we knew, but we didn't know they were that close. And this takes it to a whole nother level because it's for people who love birds and want to understand what's in their backyard. And I think it's an awesome gift idea. It's like one of those things a lot of people wouldn't get for themselves, but it's such a cool thing to give people that they can really get excited about. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And it's just, I'm always a huge fan of bringing more of nature in and getting people more excited about the things around them. And as someone who can't be in the mountains all the time or out on an adventure, this is almost like bringing a little adventure home with you. If you want to learn more about the Feather Snap camera, go to feathersnapcam.com. That's Feathersnap, S-N-A-P, cam, C-A-M.com, where you can learn more about their cameras and open up your own window to the wild. Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Mason Gravely. Today's episode is pretty cool. It's with Sonny Stroeer, and I'm not sure I got the last name completely right, Sonny. I'm sorry about that. We talked about it. It's German. But Sonny this is an awesome adventure. It's 1,000 miles on the Iditarod Trail on skis. And Sunny is not a skier. She actually spends her days touring people through the backcountry of the deserts of Utah. So a totally different environment. She's from Germany, spent a lot of time in New York City. So this was very much a unique, wild adventure for her. She is not from Alaska or does a lot in the cold. So this was way out of her comfort zone and a huge achievement. And what's really cool is her backstory. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that because she had an MBA. She was on this trajectory to be probably an executive of some large corporation, but all throughout her 20s just realized that that is not the life she wanted, and it was a pretty dramatic end to her corporate career and the start of her adventurous life. And we're going to hear how she's, despite all the crazy adventures and big wall climbing, multi-day paddling trips, and her passion for adventure, coupled with that is risk aversion, not enjoying training, and some of the other things that make her unique. And what's also interesting is that this is the first year in the Iditarod's history that someone has completed the entire 1,000 miles by ski, and Sunny was not the first, but the first woman. So had no one else finished this year, she would have not only been the first woman, but also the first person to finish the entire 1,000-mile Iditarod Trail Invitational by ski. So if you want to learn more, go to AW Expeditions, awexpeditions.org. That's one of her businesses. The other is Dreamland Safari Tours, which is dreamlandsafari-tours.net, and then Summer Scholarship Foundation, summitscholarship.org. All that is in the show notes, and we're going to talk about it. Buckle up. This one's exciting. Thank you so much for joining us over here at Adventure Sports Podcast. Where are you coming from today?
I am tuning in from Kanab, Utah, right in between Zion Bryce and the north rim of the Grand Canyon.
Oh my gosh, absolutely fantastic. I used to spend a lot of time there and take people on guided tours around there. And now that's where you're based, right? Through Dreamland Safari Tours?
Southern Utah is my home. Yes, I co-own a guide service out here, as you're saying, Dreamland Safari Tours. And I love the desert, though I also have a penchant for the cold.
I'm telling you, no kidding. You've climbed so many mountains, done so many crazy things. Well, tell us a little bit about why you wanted to do this Iditarod Trail Invitational. And tell me if I'm wrong. It seems kind of like an outlier for maybe the length and distance for this kind of adventure, a skiing adventure and on snow adventure. Was this unique to you?
This was incredibly unique to me. And, for context, so I set out and skied almost 1,000 miles through the winter of Alaska here this past March. And I'm not a skier. I mean,
You are now.
Yeah, I guess I am, but I learned how to downhill ski with my parents back in Germany, kind of resort skiing, that sort of thing. But I have no background in cross-country skiing. And yeah, I ended up spending 30 days doing just that in the middle of Alaska. So what drew me to the Iditarod Trail Invitational was that I am an endurance athlete and an ultra-endurance athlete, and I really enjoy pushing myself and finding challenges where I'm not certain what the outcome is going to be, right? But I'm also really risk averse, and that may sound odd.
Yeah, I need you to explain that a little.
I know. So I'm risk averse, but I really like pushing myself and kind of finding those areas of my comfort zone where I just don't know what's going to happen. And, the more time I spent on ultra running over the past, 10, 15 years at this point, the more I became confident that, if I put my mind to it and my body to it, and I want to go and run 100 miles or 200 miles or, do whatever it may be on trails in the mountains, that I can do that. But I had no idea what it was going to feel like or be like cross-country skiing an almost 1,000-mile distance in the winter. And at the same time, well, that was incredibly appealing. I also looked at the individual kind of components and the elements that make an adventure like this really difficult. And I felt like 85 to 90% of the risks that I was going to encounter on this trail were risks that I could proactively address and manage, and that I had some sort of control over. And that was really, really important to me.
That is a really interesting combination. The being risk averse, but also it's almost like by the time you get to that starting line, you are so prepared that your chances of success are so high that you, I mean, you probably, do you fail a lot at your adventures? Fail in the sense of not completing what you set out to do?
I fail a ton in my adventures. And in some ways, I'd actually say that the chances of success in the ITI 1000 were incredibly low. Up until this year, there wasn't a single person, man or woman, who had managed to ski the entire 1,000-mile distance within the context of the race. So even though there had been people trying it for like the last 2 decades, so success was certainly not assured. However, what I consider success is putting myself out there and trying something, doing it safely, learning from it, and coming back home, right? So in some ways, reaching the finish line was totally secondary. And I did have a high degree of confidence that I could put myself out there. I could try to do this really hard thing. And I wasn't acutely risking my life. And that was important to me.
Yeah, that's usually pretty high on my priority list too, day to day at least. Well, take us through kind of the background. You have a really interesting background, Harvard MBA. You were working, you were in meetings a lot and these executive teams, and this seems so far from where you are now in life. Like, what? I'm sure a lot of people out there are very curious about like the stepping stones to Harvard and to this life that has been sold to a lot of us as the way to go, and then your departure from that life. It's very interesting.
I actually just spent a good amount of time reflecting on that because I'm just back from guiding a mountaineering trip, a women's mountaineering trip on Mount Baker for the last couple of days. And I turned 39 during that trip. And we also had a 19-year-old participant who was celebrating her 19th birthday. And so a lot of the conversations were all around, how do you kind of set up your life? How do you find alignment? How do you thrive? How do you figure out what your passions are? How do you follow them? And for me, it was a very roundabout way. I think a lot of people look at what I do today and they're like, oh, well, you must have grown up athletic and, with crazy adventures with your parents and all those things. And I didn't. I grew up in Germany. I was very much a kind of type A overachiever. That's what my parents channeled from me and my sister. And I had my nose in a book most of the time. I, was in the choir. I was, played the violin and the piano. I was in the orchestra. I was doing like Model United Nations and debate and all of those things. And that was the path that set me up to attend Harvard undergrad and then also for grad school for an MBA. And try to land good jobs in between. I worked in finance and I worked in strategy consulting after my Harvard MBA. And at the same time, I was realizing that the deeper I got into this, on paper, very successful track and this conventional, like desirable career, the less whole and the less aligned I was feeling. So, every morning I was waking up and I had everything you could ask for in some ways. I was incredibly privileged. I mean, I worked really hard for it, but I had a lot of privilege. I still have a lot of privilege. And I had a great job. I had a great apartment. I was traveling, within the country and around the world for my work. I was working with really interesting people and companies, and I was adventuring on the weekends. And yet I was waking up angry all the time because I felt like I was just wasting my days away doing something that didn't actually speak to the core of who I am and what I have to offer the world, quite frankly. So I realized, in my late 20s, right around the time that I turned 30, that I had to make a change, and decided to just take the jump, quit my job, and bought a $3,000 van.
And usually it's all downhill from there. For a lot of people that do that. Talk to us a little bit about that internal struggle. Were you feeling guilt? Like, why am I feeling this way? I've got everything. Were you feeling the anger is really interesting. Just, I can get that misalignment can just make you very frustrated. Your fuse is short. What was it clear to you, or did it take some discovery that this is why I'm feeling this way?
It took a lot of discovery for me to figure out what was going on and what I could do about it. I mean, for the longest time, I felt so thrilled and so excited getting into Harvard, being able to attend that school, getting a good job out of college, getting into the business school, getting the MBA, getting my, at the time, dream job at Bain & Company as a management consultant in New York and then later in Texas. And I, at the same time, had started to discover sports and adventure in my mid-20s. Actually, during my time in business school, that's when I started rock climbing. It's when I started running longer distances. I ran my first ultramarathon shortly after business school. And, the adventure side of things was never, it was never an objective in and of itself. It was just that I was searching for something, I think, that would make me feel more alive than I was feeling in the other areas of my life, even though they were going incredibly well. And the thing that finally pushed me over the edge it was kind of a double track, actually. So towards my late 20s, kind of 28, 29, 30, I had really dug into the adventure side of things, and I was running ultra marathons all the time. I was doing 100 milers on the weekends while I was working 80 hours a week from Monday to Friday. I was going rock climbing and doing all these things, just always out there. And the pace was incredibly fast, right? So I had this super high-powered, fast-paced job where I barely slept during the week. And then on the weekends, I was traveling on red eyes and always on the move and always pushing hard physically, because I got so much richness and so much purpose in a way from being out in the mountains with friends and with others or by myself. And the pace just became utterly unsustainable. I remember one moment where I would typically try and figure out what I wanted to do the following weekend on like a Wednesday afternoon, because again, lots of hard work and lots of privilege. I was traveling for my job at Bain. And because I was traveling by plane every week, the company had a rule that you could use the money that you were going to spend to go back home on Fridays to go anywhere in the country. Right. So it was amazing for me because I could literally just go wherever, do whatever. And I had that travel stipend that I could put to use to go and pursue my adventures. But what that meant is that, pretty much Wednesday afternoon, once I could kind of have a good close range weather forecast for the various parts of the country, I'd be sitting there and I'd think about, okay, what do I want to do this weekend? What's the big adventure going to be? And I remember one Wednesday where I'm sitting in the team room, I'm going through that motion, and I was like, okay, so last weekend, what did I do last weekend? Let me think about this. I know I did something last weekend, but what was it? And I just couldn't remember. It took me a good, probably 5 minutes or more just trying to recall what I had done. I literally could not recall because there'd been so much overload. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I know what I did. I climbed Mount Hood. And it just completely slipped my mind that I climbed Mount Hood the previous weekend because things were so fast that, I just couldn't hold on to anything, right? So that was a moment where I was like, okay, I know that I need to make a change. Around the same time, I also got put on an incredibly, incredibly difficult case at work where my longest work day ended up being 43 hours straight. And I walked away from that case that I delivered successfully and, just couldn't do it anymore. I mean, I hit full on burnout and I said, okay, I don't have an option anymore. I can't go on like this. I'm going to drive over a bridge if I do.
Wow. So what seems like the riskier option to us on the outside, which would be, leaving all this, moving into a van, to you, that was not the risk. The risk was continuing on the track you were on. That was the riskier of the two directions.
I have to admit that, for several years preceding those episodes, I had started thinking about how amazing it would be if I could quit my job and, live on the road for a little while and just adventure and kind of follow the things, the passions that I felt and the things that I really wanted to do. And I always dismissed it because it seemed so far-fetched and so impossible. And, while my life may sound like a fairy tale at the time, I don't come from a background of money. I had attended grad school on student loans. I was paying off six-figure student loans. I, had a lot of debt. I was making a lot of money, so that was fantastic. But all of my money was either going towards repaying loans or financing the kind of adventure addiction that I had started to,
Yeah, really, really kind of develop an appetite for.
Exactly. And, plus I'm a German citizen. I was born and raised in Germany, so I still don't have a US passport. And at the time I didn't have a green card either. So the moment that I quit my job, I was going to have to leave the country, which I didn't want to do because the US feels like home to me. So I had all of those very real constraints for why I didn't think that I could leave my job, in addition to, what society tells us, which is get a good job, make good money, get the promotions, have a career, buy a house, do the thing and set yourself up well in life. And I was struggling with that mentally as well, of course.
What a crossroads. What were the people around you saying? Were you talking to them about this decision and this change that you wanted, or were you keeping it to yourself?
I kept it pretty close. I mentioned that I was in burnout after that one particularly difficult case. And because I was in burnout and because I knew that I needed to make a change, I announced my resignation. I actually gave notice to the partner team at Bain. But after I'd done that, this was in April, I think, I looked at the reality of my situation. And I said, oh crap, I still have a lot of student loans and I will have to leave the country immediately, as soon as I quit work. And so I had submitted my resignation and I kind of backpedaled and I was like, kind of kidding, kind of not kidding. I am leaving, but I won't be leaving until the end of the year. So I gave myself an 8 or 9 month off ramp to try and figure out my affairs. So the partner team and my bosses at Bain knew what I was planning. Some other people knew, but I wasn't necessarily, broadcasting it a lot. And then my family and closest friends knew, and they were mostly supportive and encouraging. But, the few folks that I talked to about this at work, they were all like, what do you mean you're moving into a van? Like, back then van life it wasn't what it's now, where you look at all these, I kind of want to say like, millennial yuppies who got awesome remote jobs and these $150,000 rigs and Starlink, and they're working from the road and living the dream, on the surface from the outside. Back then, van life was still very kind of under the radar. And my van was never a nice rig with Starlink. It was a $3,000 heavy Astrovan with 200,000 miles on it that I built out with a handsaw.
See, seems like two different people battling inside you. Wow, that's wild. So your family, I know that getting into Harvard, very proud, and that was a huge achievement. I'm sure they were, if you were talking to them about it, it was like, what in the world are you doing? You're blowing up your life.
Interestingly enough, it wasn't. My mom was a physician and, very successful medical professional in Germany. And my dad was an entrepreneur. And, they were both the first generation in their respective families to attend university and to kind of be able to break into the middle class. And as they were doing that, in the German post-war generation, I think they very much subscribe to the career orientation, the materialism. They grew up starving essentially as kids and wanted to provide for a better future for their kids. So their whole lives were focused on work, and money.
Stability, probably, just trying,
exactly.
Never wanting to go back to that. I get it. I definitely get it.
So that was really important to them. And at the same time, they lost their marriage over that. And I think they also realized that the relationships that they built with me and my sister weren't anywhere near as powerful as they probably could have been if we spent more time as a family and they'd maybe spend a little bit less time working. And so by the time I was making that decision to throw away my career in a way, both of my parents were incredibly supportive and very, very excited for me to be figuring this out early in my life when I still had the flexibility and the opportunity to kind of course correct and try a couple things out and then maybe figure out something more sustainable in the long term.
This is so interesting. And sorry we're dwelling on this so long. It's just I think it's so important to establish who you are and why you have this drive and the freedom. So take us through, because a lot of people daydream about stuff like this and want to adventure and want to do the things that maybe you were thinking of then. What were some of the things you did right with changing your life's direction, and what are some of the things that you maybe see folks that maybe never get past dreaming it? Because I'm sure it's not what it seems. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of the skills, obviously the work ethic that you have and that you were putting into that role. You got to transfer a lot of that to this new direction.
I think the biggest thing that I did right was to make a commitment to change and to follow through on it. And in all honesty, I mentioned earlier that, I'd spent a couple years prior to that transformative moment saying, oh, I wish I could, but I don't think I can. The only thing that got me to actually commit to quitting and to make that change and to figure it out was because I didn't see a path forward anymore in the life that I had built. So I needed that burnout and I needed that crisis in my established career to give me the courage and the drive and the catalyst to course correct. And that's what I regret, because I'm thinking about it now. And I knew when I was 27, 28, 29, that really consulting and a business career and a conventional life were not for me. And I completely dismissed the possibility of me making a change in a deliberate way. Okay. It took
it wasn't even on the table. So there's no way you could have done it. You had no faith you could do it.
I legitimately did not think that I could. And I talked about it with friends as well. I was like, oh, I wish I could do this. I remember I got promoted to manager at Bain, which is one of the hardest promotions to clear. And, I got the news of the promotion and I accepted it and I cried for the rest of the day. I didn't want to be in that position. And yet I didn't see how I could walk away from the money, how I could walk away from the visa sponsorship, how I could walk away from that career path, because I felt too trapped and I felt like there just wasn't a way for me to solve all of the complications that would come with me making a change. And then I got into burnout and I hit a wall, and it was literally a question between me jumping off a building or making a change. And that's when I made the change. It took me that long. So that's what I regret, because in retrospect, having gone through that phase and having gone through that forced transformation, I know now that when I wasn't in crisis at 27, at 28, at 29, if I had been deliberate and I had said, I am quitting at 30 and I am setting myself up to move into a van and to make this change and to save a bit of money and to make sure that I'm debt free, I would have 100% been able to figure it out, because I ended up being able to figure it out.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. A lot of y'all know I work for Athletic Brewing Company through my day job, and we use Shopify for our e-commerce platform. And Shopify is so helpful because even when we were a tiny little startup, just a couple employees, we were using Shopify. And now as we've grown to one of the biggest breweries in the country, well, we're still using Shopify. They make it so easy to grow. And I actually am recommending it to anybody starting a business, big or small. Definitely go with Shopify. I have a ton of firsthand experience with this global commerce platform, and it helps truly at every stage of the business. I've seen it firsthand. Whether you're auctioning off one-of-a-kind things like autographed apparel or sports memorabilia, baseball cards, or selling skis, it really doesn't matter. They can help you at any stage of business and sell anywhere. I host a podcast through my day job, and we host the podcast and put it all on there on our blog on the website. It's great. We can put different surveys online, and there's all sorts of apps that go into it. It's really user-friendly and very robust. If you want to sign up for their $1 per month trial period, go to shopify.com/ASP, all lowercase. Shopify.com/ASP now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Again, that's shopify.com/ASP for Adventure Sports Podcast. Hey folks, this episode is brought to you by, the state of Colorado. If you didn't know, this show was born and raised in Colorado. So many of our guests and stories take place there. So many of my adventures take place there. And we hope these episodes inspire you to seek an exciting trip of your own this summer in the beautiful state of Colorado. I was just there in Aspen, went hiking. It was absolutely breathtaking. And the mountains get a lot of attention, but there's culinary adventures, outdoor adventures, entertainment and scenic outdoor venues, from music festivals and film festivals and all sorts of festivals. The state has it all. Experience the thrill of mountain biking along riverside trails or hop aboard a train for a railroad adventure. It has charming mountain and historic towns and cities, historic hotels, dude ranches, and like I said before, amazing cuisine, Michelin star level dining. And on those chilly summer nights, relax in one of the hot springs. Let Colorado awaken your spirit of adventure and explore all the possibilities that the state has to offer at visitcolorado.com and uncover the magic and start planning your getaway today. Visit colorado.com. I love a good deal as much as the next person, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals just to save a few bucks. It has to be relatively easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called BS on them. Well, turns out it really is that easy to get wireless for $15 a month. The longest part of the process was the time I spent on hold waiting to break up with my old provider. It is super easy to switch your wireless carrier to Mint Mobile. They got a great website, easy to purchase, get your phone activated. If you're looking to work with Mint Mobile, go to mintmobile.com/ASP. And you'll see how to sign up for one of their 3-month plans that are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months on premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/ASP. That's mintmobile.com/ASP. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower at 40 gigs on unlimited plan. Additional tax, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Hey folks, this episode is brought to you by, well, the state of Colorado. If you didn't know, this show was born and raised in Colorado. So many of our guests and stories take place there. So many of my adventures take place there. And we hope these episodes inspire you to seek an exciting trip of your own this summer in the beautiful state of Colorado. I was just there in Aspen, went hiking. It was absolutely breathtaking. And the mountains get a lot of attention, but there's culinary adventures, outdoor adventures, entertainment and scenic outdoor venues from music festivals and film festivals and all sorts of festivals. The state has it all. Experience the thrill of mountain biking along riverside trails or hop aboard a train for a railroad adventure. It has charming mountain and historic towns and cities, historic hotels, dude ranches, and like I said before, amazing cuisine, Michelin star level dining. And on those chilly summer nights, relax in one of the hot springs. Let Colorado awaken your spirit of adventure and explore all the possibilities that the state has to offer at visitcolorado.com and uncover the magic and start planning your getaway today. Visit colorado.com. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. That's really powerful. Take us, and then we'll jump right into the itinerary, the Iditarod, because we haven't even talked about that. What was one of the first moments that you knew that you were on the right path once you made the change?
So I gave myself this long off ramp because I was still scared. I still had to figure out the money side of things. I still had to figure out the visa side of things and the logistics. And as I'm nearing the end of my off ramp at Bain, I was wrapping up my casework. I was selling all of my belongings. I had canceled the lease on my apartment. Obviously, I was moving out of that. I was building out my tiny little van that, I did on probably no more than a $5,000 budget all in all, between buying the vehicle and building it out. And I was pushing so hard to be able to close the chapter on my life up to that point on the 31st of December, 2015. I wanted to start the new year, just with a clean slate, fresh, and really step into my new life. And I remember things always take longer than you think they would, and everything's harder, and, there's more to do than you think. And so per the usual, my last couple of weeks, definitely last couple of days trying to get out of the apartment, get out of the job, get into the van, were so frantic. I think I lost like 7 pounds or so in 4 days because I was running back and forth between my apartment and the parking garage so much, trying to move in and get everything physically taken care of and tie up all the loose ends. And the very last thing that I did was I sent a goodbye email to my colleagues at Bain, which is a tradition that, we had at the company. And I sent that email to everybody I'd worked with from, junior associates all the way to the senior partners, and said that essentially, I was leaving the company and I was quitting my job, and that as of the end of the day on the 31st, I had no employment, no home, no health insurance, and no plan. And that to some, that might mean utter destitution. And for me, it meant limitless possibility. And I remember sending that email and getting so many responses from so many people, all the way to, the managing partner being like, wow, this is incredible. I wish I'd had the guts to do what you're doing when I was your age. Good luck.
Wow.
And then I drove myself out to Big Bend National Park, which was the closest national park to where I was. And
which is out there. I mean, you're out there at Big Bend.
It was out there, about 11 hours driving from Houston. So I made it just before midnight. And it was nasty weather. It was cold and sleeting and snowing. And, it was dark. I was in the middle of nowhere by myself in this tiny little shabby van. And I went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning with just the biggest grin on my face. And that smile did not disappear for the next months. I mean, it was amazing. Every morning I felt like I was a kid in a candy store. And it essentially, the way I, think about it is it kind of felt like I was a, 5 or a 6-year-old, completely clean slate, completely fresh start, except that I had my faculties as an adult and my abilities, right? No obligations, no stresses, no nothing. Just do whatever I want to do, at least for a little while, for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And that was just absolutely amazing.
Unreal. That is a great point. You have the capabilities of an adult, but you're towing that line with the being able to dream big and kind of live that before life's responsibilities can really get in front of you. So that is wild. So, I know where you are now with what you do for work and all the things you've accomplished, even before you left, but also obviously since then. I want to talk about how this 1,000-mile challenge started to come into view. Obviously, we've just learned you are capable of doing very hard things. And I'm sure a lot of those skills just transfer so well into an endless sea of ice and snow and the Alaskan wilderness. How did this idea come about, and what made you want to be the first woman to ever complete it during the race itself?
As you might be able to imagine from the stories that I've been telling, I do have a lot of drive. I have that certain type A, seed in me. And I do really enjoy challenge, and I enjoy pushing myself. And I've been doing that pretty much nonstop since I quit my job in 2015. I'd started before then, but I really dove into it starting in 2016. And something that I noticed about myself early on was that I love the feeling of uncertain outcomes. I love going into situations where I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to react. And as I mentioned earlier, at the same time, I don't like risk. So starting sometime around the moment that I quit my job, I was already thinking about the fact that the South Pole sounds really, really, really appealing. Because when I think about the South Pole, I think about extreme conditions, extreme circumstances, extreme solitude if you do it solo, really difficult physical and mental challenge, and outside of extremely cold weather, a limited amount of objective hazards. There are no avalanches really on the, kind of traditional routes. There are no polar bears. You're probably not going to fall off anything. There is some crevasse fall risk, but it's pretty well manageable because, the routes are well established. They avoid the major crevasse fields. And so, just this really big challenge, really difficult thing without a crazy amount of like acute objective hazard. And that sounded really appealing to me. So I've had my eyes on the South Pole for a long time. And I have a challenge, which is that I am not a cross-country skier. I don't know if I still get to say that I'm not a cross-country skier, but I used to not be a cross-country skier. So how do you prepare for something like this, right? I have to admit that I'm terrible when it comes to discipline and training, and I get really bored really easily.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Really? I mean, just being type A, I just feel like that's one of the capabilities is like, well, it's Saturday. I've got to do my 20-mile cross-country ski training, and you just get up and do it. But that's not the case.
Nope, not at all. On the contrary, routine training, discipline, not my thing. I'm a massive procrastinator, and I love figuring stuff out on the fly.
That makes me feel so much better because I'm the same way. I'm like, training sucks, but I want to go do it. And or
Agreed.
something fun, like I got to go do something where I don't realize I'm training. You know, it's got to be
Agreed.
productive too. Like rather than I can't just go work out. I can't just go be on a treadmill. I need to like work on the porch or build something or carry some shingles to the roof. Something that actually gets something done. I don't know. Is that the thing is with you as well? Then how do you do that with training for this? You got to do something to get ready for this.
That's exactly me. And that means I need micro adventures to get me ready for the macro adventures, right? So I started looking around and I was like, okay, how do I get ready to ski the South Pole eventually? How do I learn to cross country ski without like diving straight into a, big, unsupported Greenland crossing with a partner or something like that? And I was like, oh, I just heard about this thing, the Iditarod Trail Invitational. That sounds cool. It's actually longer than the South Pole. It's, almost 1,000 miles. The South Pole is only like 712, but it's supported and there's infrastructure and there are other people who do it and it's in Alaska. So there are indoor opportunities in between. And presumably, if it's a race, there'll be a gear list. So isn't this like a great way for me to learn? So that was my thinking in 2020. And I approached the race director at the time, Katie Merchant, who we share our German heritage. And I approached her and I said, hey, I'd really like to do your race. I see that there's all these prerequisites, like, you're supposed to do winter ultra marathons before and qualify and whatnot. And I was like, I don't have any of the prereqs, but I've done a lot of cold weather things in the mountains. I've set speed records, on high altitude peaks. I've done a ton in the Andes. I've all this, adventure resume in my background. Would you let me go and attempt the race? And she says, well, let's talk about it. Let's meet. So we met and, she kind of checked me out and she said, okay, I will let you in, but for the 350-mile version, which is the short Iditarod. Now, don't get me wrong, 350 miles is a long ways to go. And for a lot of ultra endurance athletes and winter athletes, just doing the 350 is a pinnacle experience. That's what people work towards for years and years and years and years. And I was somewhere between type A, naive and arrogant enough to be like, oh, really? To do the 350? I wanted to go straight to the 1,000, right? Because I was saying it's a lot of time and money to go up there to Alaska. It doesn't really matter to me if it's, 10 days for a 350-mile race or 30 days for a 1,000-mile race, the preparation that goes into it, the logistics, all of it, the effort. I might as well try for the whole thing.
That's
and Katie
true.
said, absolutely.
That's true.
Yeah. But Katie said, absolutely not. You have no experience. I am letting you in for the 350, but you cannot do the 1,000. You have to first finish the 350. And I tried, pleading and arguing with her. I was like, listen, just make it conditional, see if I can finish the 350. If I make it to the 350 finish line, let me continue on for the 1,000, right? And Katie was like, nope, not going to happen. I'm not going to let you do that, but have fun with the 350.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Were you pretty frustrated or do you understand her point of view?
It was a little bit of both. I was bummed. I was like, oh, now I have to do this 2 years in a row.
Right.
But I accepted it. And, I trusted her judgment. I was like, oh, but wouldn't it be cool if I could, go straight to the 1,000? But I decided to say, okay, fine, accept it. It's your race. I'm playing by your rules, obviously. So I signed up for the 350. And then the race changed hands, actually. I went to another race director, but that race director, Kyle, honored the agreement that Katie and I had and allowed me to participate in the 350. Now it's COVID, there's a big question mark if the race is even on and this and that and whatnot. But, I signed up for the February 2021 edition. And as the fall months progress, I am not really receiving any emails from the race. So, eventually I reached out to Kyle and I'm like, hey, so I paid my registration fees. I'm signed up for this, but I haven't gotten anything from you guys. Am I not on your mailing list? And he gets back to me and says, oh, thanks for checking in. As a matter of fact, we didn't have you on the mailing list for some reason. Sorry about that. So, we'll make sure that you get all the emails going forward. And I said, okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. The thing that would really help me the most, by the way, Kyle, is I need the gear list, because I want to start prepping. And Kyle responds and he's like, oh, well, I can send you the race handbook. Here's a link. But just so you know, this is the Iditarod Trail Invitational. There is no gear list. And I'm like, wait, what? So, this is how little research I'd done on this race. But the whole assumption behind the ITI is that when you get to a point where The race director deems you qualified to participate in this race. You know what you're doing. And it's entirely up to you what you want to bring and how you want to do this. And as a matter of fact, the race doesn't really provide anything for you. I mean, there are a couple of aid stations early on, but they're far and few between. And the race really doesn't provide anything for you other than a start line, a couple of other people who are starting at the same time, and a spot device that's a GPS tracker, but it is only a GPS tracker. It doesn't even have an SOS button. So if you get yourself in trouble, it's on you. You can carry your own GPS device that, can initiate a rescue, but the race just, you sign up, you sign a waiver, you go out there, you are on your own. And if you get yourself in trouble, it's on you to get yourself out of trouble. The race is not going to come after you and rescue you.
Unreal. And so the fact that you're asking for a gear list is probably setting up a few red flags for Kyle. So then what? So you're like, okay, this is on me. And now, did you have to do the 350? How did you get your way to do the 1,000?
Yeah. So essentially, what happened at that point? So I was signed up for the 350. I had asked for the gear list. I realized that there wasn't one. And I think this was late November or so. And the moment that I understood from Kyle that there wasn't a gear list and that this was my responsibility, period, I was like, oh, crap. So I kicked into high gear because all of a sudden I'm like, I have cold weather experience. I have high altitude mountaineering experience, but I don't have actual winter ultra experience. I've never been at sea level in negative 40 degrees trying to go fast and, sleeping out night after night after night, potentially trying to take care of myself, stay alive and just, not screw up. Mm-hmm. So that insight, that moment really kicked me into high gear, and I started doing my homework, started doing my research. I approached a ton of race veterans who are all incredibly gracious and sharing their knowledge and their experience with me. And I pieced it together. But before I started my first 350, which was February 2021, and it was the 350 that I did, I ended up feeling so nervous about it and so out of my depth that I didn't really talk about it with anybody other than like my husband and my closest friends, because I figured, I looked at the things that I had done and the very obvious lack of relevant cold weather experience and relevant racing experience that I was fully expecting I was going to show up to Alaska. Oh, and by the way, lack of skiing experience as well. I was skiing the 350, but I was expecting I was going to show up to Alaska and start and probably get my butt handed to me and have to drop out within like the first 24 hours.
And that doesn't sit well with you. You don't want to go up there for that experience.
Oh, I didn't want to embarrass myself. I guess that was a big thing. I definitely didn't want to endanger my life, but I also really, as a next step, did not want to embarrass myself and have people look at me and be like, yeah, no kidding. Of course you weren't able to do this. Duh, what were you thinking? Right. So I show up to the race late February 2021, and I'm, more on my toes and more anxious about this than about really anything that I've done in the decade prior, probably. And we start out, there's like, I think 60 or 70 other people. And the entire race just ended up being absolutely awe-inspiring, amazing, hard, and humbling. And I had to push harder than in almost anything else that I'd done, at least for that duration of time. And I was able to finish it, but barely. I finished with 20 minutes to spare on the clock. And I remember I was so drawn out. I think the last 4 nights I pretty much didn't sleep, and I was just chasing cutoffs, trying to make it through, and, just struggling for so long. And it was such a powerful and such an empowering experience for me that I knew, even as I'm trotting towards the finish line, hoping to not miss the cutoff, and, just desperate to be done because I was so strung out. Before I'd even crossed the finish line, I knew that I needed to come back and do the short distance again, because there was so much more that I needed and wanted to learn, and because it had been such a powerful experience that I wanted to repeat that.
Well, we'll take us through what you experience out there, the conditions, the day-to-day living, this 1,000 miles of It's almost like what we're familiar with, like a through hike, but on snow, on skis, in the bitter cold, -50 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it's ridiculous conditions. What are you experiencing on the day to day? Take us through something like that.
It really is a lot like a through hike. I mean, it is a through hike. For me on skis or on foot, you're just way out there. If you do the math, 350 miles in 10 days or then almost 1,000 miles in 30 days. So you're looking at somewhere north of 30 miles a day on average that you have to put down. Now, of course, there are days where you can't do as much because of bad weather, or you need rest days or whatever it may be. So, there were a lot of days that I had to do 40 or up to 50 miles, which was, really tough because travel out there is slow. I mean, you're traveling on the Iditarod Trail itself. So the famous, sled dog race is happening on that same trail at the same time. You see the dogs, you see the mushers, which is super cool. And you're out in the middle of nowhere of snowy Alaska.
And they think you're crazy. They're like,
Exactly.
we've got all these dogs. You're
Yeah.
on foot. Unreal.
The dynamic between the mushers and the human powered races is pretty funny. And I know you've talked to a couple of folks who've done the ITI before, so you know that dynamic. But it's wild just being way out there in the middle of nowhere, far, far off the road system, right? Because you start the race near Anchorage at Knick Lake, which you can drive to, and then you move from the road system to trails and kind of the side country, and then you follow rivers towards the Alaska range. You cross the Alaska range, and then you're on the other side of the range in the Alaskan interior, again traveling, a lot on frozen rivers, frozen lakes, frozen tundra, in terrain that is only accessible by plane, boat, or snow machine to most people. And then, of course, to the dogs and to us human powered racers here and there as well. But on like ethereal trails that are seasonal, you can only pass through there in the winter, because in the summer, I mean, you could go and travel the rivers by boat, but the swamps you can't get through. The tundra is all, super, super boggy and, just not feasible for either vehicular or foot travel, really. And it's just incredible because every day, all you're trying to do is you're trying to stay warm. You're trying to stay fed because you need calories, you need energy to be able to move forward. And you're trying to stay awake and move fast enough to get to a spot where you can ideally sleep indoors. That's, the A+ gold standard if you're able to do that. But if you're too slow, or if the stretches in between villages or in between, safety cabins are too far, can be up to 100 and 150 miles in between indoor access. Like, you're just moving as long and as far and as fast as you can. And then you're setting up your little bivvy in, -45-degree temperatures and trying to melt some snow for water, trying to stay warm in your sleeping bag, trying to make sure you get calories, and do it all over again after, 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep.
When we conjure up images in our mind of what you're seeing, it's a lot of tundra, it's a lot of emptiness, not quite Antarctic level of blandness, but maybe similar. I know there's a big climb at the beginning, the first couple 100 miles, as you get through a mountain range. And then it is a lot of, rivers, which are consistently downhill. Take us through kind of the challenge of getting through the terrain compared to some of the other things you've done.
It's really wild because even though the distances are vast, and in some ways you could imagine that the course is monotonous, it really isn't, because the landscape changes character day after day after day. And you start out, as I said, kind of road system and side country. Then rivers take you up into the Alaska range, where you cross Rainy Pass, which is this 3,300-foot pass that is just way in the middle of the mountains in these deep gorges and beautiful valleys. And then once you're through that, you're just in a vast expanse of tundra and, light forest, like an empty space in the interior. And that kind of persists until about mile 350 or so, which is where the short course finishes, in McGrath in the interior. But then when you go beyond that into the 1,000-mile race, it gets even wilder, because to start with, you have more interior stretches that, are tundra and kind of rolling valleys, but nobody travels there. Nobody travels there. And there are no native villages. There are no permanent settlements. There are a couple of old, like, ghost mining towns from the gold rush, but they're dilapidated buildings and, ruins, and just nothing's there except for when the Iditarod sled dog race passes through. So for me, actually, I was in the very back of the field as I was leaving McGrath, the short finish line at mile 350, and I was pushing out into that unknown terrain for me, attempting the next 600 miles and the 1,000-mile distance. Very last person in the human-powered race. The dogs had already passed through, and the trail sweeps for the Iditarod, the main Iditarod, which is just a crew of a couple of folks on snow machines, kind of making sure that, they pick up anybody who's in trouble and, assist and, make sure that there isn't like litter on the trail and whatever else. The trail sweeps had caught up to me shortly after McGrath, and now they had passed through. And what that meant was that I knew it was just me. There was literally nobody behind me on the seasonal trail who was traveling that direction. And I wasn't going to hit the next village for like another 150 miles. And I'm just alone, completely alone. No hopes of having anybody pass by, anybody be able to help out if I were to get myself in trouble. And that was really powerful.
What did that feel like?
That felt very, very, very scary in some ways, and also very empowering and reassuring, because by that point, I'd done the short distance 3 times, by the way, so I completed the 350 in 2021, 2022, and 2023. So I'd been on those trails quite a bit, but, now I'm in the 1,000-mile distance. This is my first time doing the 1,000. It's my first time going through this long, vast, empty expanse of the interior, and I'm the very last person passing through there. So on the one hand, I had the confidence that I could keep myself safe and that I had the skills that I needed to be there. And at the same time, it felt like there was no safety net. And it was an incredibly cold period. We were in temperatures that were consistently between probably -15 for daytime highs down to -45, -50 at night. And there were, for, almost 100 miles, no safety cabins either, no opportunity to get indoors out of the elements, even if it was into an unheated shelter cabin, none of that. And so I'm just way out there, way by myself, and just on the very margin of what I consider possible and safe. And I'm getting colder and colder by the day. I'm getting more and more tired. I'm running lower and lower on calories. I actually got a little bit of frostbite on my hands because the conditions were so cold. And my only option to get myself out of this position that I had voluntarily put myself into, right, was to keep moving and be smart and not make mistakes and get to the next village, which was Ruby at the beginning of the Yukon River at mile 500. It was powerful.
Absolutely. I mean, it made that Astrovan probably look like the Taj Mahal from years ago. We often, when you talk to people about this, I'm sure they have all sorts of questions and things. And, there's often this, what's marketed as the danger, or what's common knowledge is what people think might be the danger. And then there's the people who experience these things and know the true dangers, like the things that aren't as maybe dramatic or scary, but it's really what you should be worried about. What were the true dangers out there as you made your way? Obviously the cold, but what were you always keeping in mind?
Let me maybe talk about, what people generally assume the dangers are and what also is in the back of my mind when I think about this. 1, wildlife, 2, exposure, and 3, going through the ice and falling through the ice, going into water, because you're traveling on frozen water courses a lot, right? So as far as wildlife is concerned, a lot of people ask about bears and whatnot. It's too early in the season really for bears. I mean, I guess, under extraordinary circumstances, there's a possibility it might be a bear that comes out of hibernation early, but that's typically not an issue. There are wolves out there. You see tracks. You get really lucky. You maybe see a wolf, but they're ghosts. They don't
If you
bother
get
anybody.
lucky,
So
you get to see a wolf.
exactly. So that's not a concern at all. Moose are actually really dangerous and really aggressive, and they are out there and they do create issues, and they have attacked racers in the past. There haven't been any severe injuries from that yet, but racers have gotten trampled and whatever else. And actually one of the mushers this year ended up having to shoot a moose because the moose was attacking his dog team. So that is a real risk, and I was very, very mindful of that. But it's a little bit like down here in the lower 48, if you're in mountain lion terrain, mountain lions are out there. Yep, they could attack you, but the odds are low. And so, if you venture into that terrain, you accept the risk and you just hope it doesn't happen, right?
Right. You take it's like, could you get struck by lightning? It could happen out there through hiking.
Exactly.
You're gonna go through storms.
Exactly.
If I just quick side note, before you jump into the more to the true dangers, I interviewed a guy yesterday, Spencer McCullough, who just completed a couple weeks ago biking to every national park in the lower 48 in one trip. It was
Wow.
it took a year, and it was 400 days, and it was 18,000 miles. And I said, what was dangerous besides cars, the most obvious? He's like, dude, he goes, moose. Yeah, because I could care less about the grizzlies, like in the sense of just that you don't see them that much. It's more of a treat, like you said with the wolves. He goes, moose are so scary. They're so dangerous. There's so many more encounters. He goes, I am trying to get that out there. And it's so funny. The next day I talk to you and you say the same thing. Moose.
Yep.
Moose is where it's at. That's and that's no joke. Wow. Well, what else were you concerned? Obviously, I mean, exposure. That seems like one that could be, very much true. Or were do you deal with this well? That's something I would worry about personally.
Exposure is very real. And when I say exposure, I mean, exposure to the elements, cold, wind, wet, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in some ways, the whole concept behind a race like the ITI is managing your exposure and knowing how to deal with that, right? So that, in my mind, is your primary job, even more so than being physically enduring. I mean, you have to have really good cardio to be able to put down 30, 40, 50 miles day after day after day after day for a month, right?
Yes.
But as an ultra runner, you can train for that. That's not that hard. It's really the kind of expedition mindset and the exposure management that is a big deal, and that is a real risk. As I said, I got frostbite in that one really lonely section, and that was shame on me. That shouldn't have happened. That was because I mismanaged the way I thought about exposure and how far I let myself go before taking care of things. So that really is that is a risk, and that is very real. But the way I think about it is that it's not an acute risk, as in, you don't go from being fine to not being fine in a split second. You see the issue coming for hours or potentially days. You feel that you're getting low on calories. You can sense your temperature changing. You can feel that, say you're sweating. Actually, that's typically how people end up in trouble. They actually push too hard. They layered up too much. They start sweating. Yep. And now all of a sudden, they have a lot of moisture on their body. Water conducts heat 23 and a half times more effectively than air. So now, as you're cooling down from that sweaty state, that's when you actually end up having issues, and that's when you get cold. But all of those things are to a large degree within your control, and you can do something about them, and you should do something about them, and you shouldn't ever let yourself get to a point where the cold is that dangerous to you. And then, the third thing that people think about, and that I do think about, is going through the ice, falling into water. Because again, going back to how dangerous it is to be wet out there, breaking through the ice and going into water is the fastest way to get wet. And even if hopefully you don't drown, which is also a realistic possibility, you could get sucked underneath the ice, not be able to come back out. So drowning is a risk. But if you don't drown, if you just kind of punch in and you're able to come back out, you're still soaked now. And now, you have to deal with that exposure again. So that to me was a real concern. And we did have multiple racers who went through the ice. I was lucky in that I didn't. So there's that.
Wow. So it's just another one of those risks. You just have to hope it doesn't happen. Hope you're not, roll that dice.
Correct.
Wow, that's why there's not a whole lot you can do about that. I mean, you can't constantly be checking the depths, and you probably maybe can start to learn. I don't know if there's any signs right before the ice breaks, sounds or cracking or something that you can, or sides of the river or sides of, different bends in the river you can kind of learn are usually thinner. But that's scary. That is scary.
Yeah. Yeah, there are signs that, you can observe. And actually what happened to the racers who had issues this year, I think one of them was, somebody was trying to cross a river on a fat bike because, in the ITI, you can choose your discipline. You can do it on foot, you can do it on skis, or you can do it on fat bike. And so we had a fat biker who was crossing a river on the trail that was, compact and firm on good solid ice. And then there was a very, very steep riverbank on the far side that she was trying to push her bike up. And she ended up losing her footing because, she's dealing with like a 60-pound bike trying to get that up this super steep hill. And so she lost her footing, fell together with the bike, and fell slightly off the trail onto, ice that wasn't as strong. And that's how she ended up going in. And then, somebody else had an issue where actually a big problem in Alaska on those water courses is what's called overflow. So it's not that the ice itself isn't solid. It's just that, as their pressure changes and the ice gets loaded with heavy snow, cracks develop in the ice. And those cracks aren't big enough to fall through, but they are big enough to let water through. And so as the snow on top of the ice is pushing the ice down, you have river water come up through that frozen surface and kind of flood things on top of the ice.
Wow.
Okay, so it's really, really asinine in a way because you have a frozen river, solid ice, you can put a car in it, no problem. Then you have a big layer of snow that's covering all of it. This could be anywhere from a foot to 10 feet of snow to more on top of the ice. And then you have flooding that's happening right between the solid ice and the snow, right? And so as you step off the broken trail and you kind of try and put your own trail in maybe to get around an obstacle or something like that on such a frozen water course, if the snow on top of the ice is, say, maybe a foot or two deep, and you're able to, post hole in all the way to the actual ice surface underneath, there's a very good chance that you're going to find a pool of water rather than solid ice. Yeah.
That's interesting. The things you start to learn and pick up on and have to watch out for, dangers that you don't have to face literally anywhere else or any other circumstance. That is incredible. And one thing you mentioned that I thought was really interesting is not it not being bland. I'm reading the book by Shackleton's Skipper right now, Endurance. Yeah, and one thing that I just read this like yesterday, and they said, you would think the whiteness and the blandness of the landscape would be monotonous, but it's anything but. It's almost always a canvas that's changing, that's being painted on constantly. And so it sounds like you experienced that as well. I would also assume your mind would almost reflect the landscape and just a whiteout. What's going on in your head is because with through hiking, there's almost these constant visual stimuli that you can kind of pick up on and talk about and think about and learn from. And there's other people a lot of times, of course, but how did this experience differ for just dealing with the amount of time you were out there alone versus other types of trips you've done?
It's one of the things that I love about any sort of ultra distance endeavor. I feel like time changes, and it's such an amazing tool to enter a state of mindfulness and flow. So on the best days that I had, which actually there were many of, I didn't really find myself thinking about anything. I mean, I think about the trail and I think about the distances and my timing and, being in the moment, but it was really just that. And I start skiing at 6 or 7 in the morning, and all of a sudden it's 14 hours later and it's getting dark. And I'm like, I haven't really thought about anything. I haven't listened to music. I haven't listened to podcasts, no audiobooks, no nothing. I've just been here.
Wait, you didn't listen to the Adventure Sports podcast the whole time?
Maybe 1 or 2 episodes, but
okay.
that was on my bad days when I really needed a boost.
My bad days too is when I listen. I'm like, I just want to hear myself mess something up. So you'd spend the whole day just not even realize it was just passing you by. That's wild.
It was beautiful because to me, it's the exact opposite of what daily life feels like. And it's this limiting of stimuli and, just being able to be present, be in the moment, and not have to think about anything other than what you're doing right then and there. That's really powerful to me. And in some ways, it actually picks back up on, me moving into the van and that carefree feeling that I was describing from having quit my job, having tied up all of my loose ends, and then just waking up in the van super happy because I had no responsibilities in a way, about all the options. And obviously, when you're in a race, you do have some responsibilities, primarily towards yourself, trying to move forward, keep yourself alive, and, take care of yourself. And at the same time, because it was such a long race with a 30-day time window, I had been very careful to make sure that my projects at work were tied up and that, I had folks filling in for me and that I had out of office responders and just I had that ability to just push daily life away. And yeah, so I'd just wake up in the morning and be like, okay, where are my skis? How far do I have to go today? How much food do I have? And sometimes it was stressful because I'd look at the weather and I'd be like, oh boy, this looks nasty, or my feet were really hurting, or I was incredibly tired, or whatever it might have been. But it was, again, so focused on the present and so simple and essential in some ways that it was a massive mental break.
I can imagine. And just the ability to focus on survival is so good for the lizard brain that we have sometimes, just to say, this is all I'm thinking about is food, water, shelter, keeping my body here and healthy and alive and warm. I know we're at time, but I would love to learn, wrap this up with, if you have a couple minutes, you talk about this time limit, and you came in really close to the time cutoff. When did that pressure start to build for you? Were you feeling that pressure? Or was it like, hey, if I get there, I get there. We'll see. Because that's you can't plan to cut it that close. Honestly, that's right there. Or did you plan?
I did finish within the cutoff. I had just under 2 hours left on the clock, I think, which seems appropriate because my first short distance ITI, I had 25 minutes left on the clock for a 10-day race. This time I had 2 hours left roughly for a 30-day race.
That was all kinds of time. You could have taken a vacation.
Exactly. That's actually what the race director said to me when I pulled up. He was like, yeah, true Sunny style. But I knew from the very start that my goal was to finish within the cutoff, and that outside of that, I had no desire and no ability to push any harder than that. I had just come off a stress fracture, actually, in my right shin. So from a cardio training perspective, I was sedentary for December and most of January. And then I had a couple of weeks, slowly start weight bearing again and trying to kind of make sure that I had a baseline fitness to go into this race with. But I also knew, obviously, I hadn't been a skier yet in the 24 history of the race who had managed to ski the 1,000-mile distance within those 30 days. A bunch of men had tried, over the years, year after year after year, and nobody had managed. And I knew that this year there were 6 men and myself who were all vying to become the first or among the first skiers to actually get this done.
So whoever did it first was the first skier, not just male or female, the first ever. Wow.
The first ever skier in the history of the race. Exactly. And in some ways, of course, it would have been awesome if I could have been the first skier, but I also knew that there were some very strong, very experienced cross-country skiers amongst the men who were going for it, including Asbjørn, who ended up becoming the first person to cross the finish line on skis. He had tried it twice before and, gotten to like mile 800 in a previous attempt and ended up having to abort. But anyway, so I knew just from a fitness and from an experience perspective, I wasn't competing with Asbjørn. It was going to be, I either make it or I don't, and everybody else either makes it or they don't. So in some ways, I did not stress myself out when it came to time and trying to put money in the bank on the, cutoff side of things. The only things that I did stress about was that I knew I needed to give myself buffer in my original race plan because things never go as planned, right? And particularly as you kind of progress farther on the course here, you end up doing this big stretch on the Yukon River, and then you do the Colorado Portage Trail, and then you end up on the coast. And the coast has really bad weather typically. You actually have to cross the Norton Sound on a 30-mile stretch of sea ice where you're literally going across the open ocean just on ice, and it's super windy, storms are really frequent, and you just don't know what's going to happen on the coast. So I knew that I needed to have buffer days for that. And I knew that in general, I needed buffer days because chances are that you can't execute perfectly for 30 days in a row. So My original plan had 4 buffer days in the schedule, and I ended up using my first 2 buffer days in the first 350 miles to McGrath. And that felt pretty bad because I knew that I was starting to cut it very, very, very close. But I also knew at the time that I didn't yet have a reason to drop out and that I still had those 2 buffer days. And so I just kept trucking along and I kept trying to do the best that I could. And I kept prioritizing pacing myself and rest every night because my big concern was that I was going to hit a wall and run out of steam before reaching the finish. So it was actually less about the timing and more about, am I able to continue on tomorrow? And that dictated my strategy, which was slow and steady and just try and put one ski in front of the other and cross my fingers that the weather holds and that I'm able to keep moving forward and make it happen.
Did you wonder at all, like, oh my gosh, I got, this is the last day. I gotta get there.
Well, so the last days were a little funny because we ended up being 6 racers in close proximity, including 2 of the other men who were on skis, actually, and then 2 foot racers and a biker who were all, in pretty close proximity because people had run into bad weather and difficult snow conditions. And, my strategy was starting to pay off where I'm going slow and steady. And so I'm kind of almost becoming stronger over time, whereas everybody else isn't sleeping and they're getting weaker over time, But there were 6 of us and we were all stressed by the cutoffs. But I think because I'd had that mindset from the very start that I knew that it was going to be close for me, that I was a little bit less stressed than a lot of the others. And what ended up happening actually was the very last 42-mile section or so from the last shelter cabin, which is Topcock, to Nome, was a period of time when we had very warm weather, which may sound great. Okay, you're not risking frostbite, but warm isn't good, because warm means that the snow is very soft. For me, it meant that it was sticking to my skis and I really couldn't ski, but then you also can't walk because you're post-holing, so warm is not good. And I started that 42-mile stretch together with 2 of the other racers on Monday morning, early in the morning, and the cutoff was Tuesday at 3 p.m. So we had, a day and change to cover those last 42 miles. And I was like, that should be in the bag. We should be able to cover 42 miles in a day and a half. And the conditions were just atrocious. So I'm moving at like 1.5 miles, 2 miles an hour. And all of us were struggling through the same thing. But we got to the midway point, mile 22, late in the day on Monday. And the other 2 racers were like, we got to keep going. The conditions are so rough, we just got to push through. We got to make it to the finish. We're going to go through the night. And I was like, the conditions are terrible. Like, I don't want to keep pushing through this. If I sleep now and I let the snow firm up with the colder nighttime temperatures, I'm willing to bet you that in the morning, travel is actually going to be a lot easier. So I'm not going to push through the night. I don't want to keep suffering like this. I'm going to lay down and sleep. So I ended up going to sleep at like 10 p.m. and slept for, I think a good 4 or 5 hours. And I was actually so comfortable in my little bivvy that I kept hitting snooze. I was like, I don't want to get up yet. I'm tired, whatever, this and that. And finally, I'm looking at my watch and I'm like, oh, crap. Now I'm like legitimately 12 hours out from the cutoff and I still have 22 miles. And if the conditions didn't improve, now I am going to be screwed.
Right.
So yeah,
Oh
that
my
got me really
gosh.
stressed.
Well, how many of the 6 finished?
Everybody. And I was dead last. I was the red lantern. There was nobody else behind me, and I'm 100% happy and fine with that. I had a blast doing that.
I mean, gosh, especially considering that the person that did finish first had tried twice before, and had this. You'd never done this like this. That's what's so crazy to me. Your first time, and just the chances, everyone finishing that first, all after no one had ever done it. So that's amazing, absolutely amazing. So I'm incredibly impressed with the lack of experience and not being injured not long before and just going for it. That's wild.
The interesting thing is that there were a couple of people who were like, oh, well, if no skier had managed before, and then this year there were in the end 4 men and myself, so 5 skiers who did it. So the conditions must have been really good, right? Like what was different this year? And actually the conditions were horrible. Like the conditions were really bad. So that wasn't it. But I think everybody knew that, skiing was such a prize and people had prepared mentally so thoroughly for this that, we all were able to push through.
Wow. Just want to hear any parting thoughts or words or tell us about what's next and where folks can kind of learn more about this story if they want to hear more. I think there's so much more. There's so many facets to this. It's such a huge achievement. I want to give you a chance to kind of share where else we can learn more, because I'm sure I am wanting to learn more myself.
Yeah, if you look me up online, Sunny Stroeer, my last name is Stroeer, and there's a bunch of stuff on my website on sunnystroeer.com. I'm keeping an active Instagram as well as S Stroeer, so first initial last name. And I have to admit that I really haven't had the time yet to do a ton of storytelling about this year's Iditarod. So this is one of the earlier podcasts that I'm doing with you, and I'm really excited about it. But I know that there's more coming out, and there may actually be a short movie about it as well. We're kind of working on that, so I'll keep things up to date on my social media and on my website as that evolves.
It's still fresh, and so it's a huge honor to be able to talk to you. And what are you just kind of getting ready for summer season with your day job or what you do in the deserts? And what do you think's on the horizon for you?
Well, I was supposed to be on Denali the last couple of weeks, and that ended up falling through at the last minute. So I just got back from guiding Mount Baker over the weekend, and then I'm mostly here at home in the desert now doing my day job, hiking, guiding in the desert. Yeah, so there's that.
It's I'm sure you got some stories to tell, and folks probably just constantly blown away once you start, getting into it. They're like, "You did what now?" That's so cool. Well, I hate to run, but Sunny, this is absolutely amazing. You're a great storyteller, and obviously you're a photographer. You do so much, and so you made the right decision, it sounds like, by leaving everything, moving into the van, and going to Big Bend. What a way to start this new trajectory, and you're on this path. This is, your story's not over. It's still, the stuff is, you're creating huge achievements all the time. So thanks for being an example for the rest of us.
Well, thank you, Mason, and thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to the show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.